They call it a moment because it fits inside a thumb-sized frame. A slice of time you can pause, replay, loop, and weaponize. But moments don't arrive alone. They're freighted with histories, small decisions, old wounds, neighborhood rules, family dynamics, and a long list of off-camera choices that created the people who appear on screen. That's the knot you have to untie if you want to understand why a Pizza Hut video sparked more than jokes. It's why a cashier's nervousness looked like comedy to some and a siren to others. It's why a man who could have walked away instead stayed and gave everyone a different ending, one the internet refused to notice. What you watched for 40 seconds was only the shine on a much larger object. The real story is in the dents. The legal fights were over by the time the Pizza Hut footage showed up on a feed near you. If you read court transcripts, you could see the way people tried to domesticate the chaos, with forms, lines, and polite interrogations. But courtrooms are tidy places where mess is given names like battery and vandalism, where the human noise is abstracted into filings and boxes to check. Outside the courthouse, life doesn't fit into boxes. By September 3, 2025, the custody plan was signed. The litigation that had roared across headlines and talk shows eventually quieted into a set of arrangements, lawyers withdrawing almost apologetically from the center stage. Two people who'd publicly dragged each other through mud, accusations, arrests, humiliations, agreed to a framework that prioritized the children. That agreement was quiet. It was not cinematic. It did not trend. Peace is not good content. 5 months later, they were in a Pizza Hut. Two adults making an ordinary transaction, buying pizza for children. Nothing spectacular to announce on social. But someone filmed it. The clip found an audience that was not interested in nuance. It's tempting to zoom in and point at the most visible person in the frame, the celebrity. But if you're trying to understand what made the clip hit a nerve, widen the lens. Look at the cashier. Look at the immediate lived context. Look at the archive of moments that taught artists everywhere to flinch when a phone appears. The clip spread because it translated easily into the language internet platforms reward. A micro-drama you could tag, remix, and monetize. But it took minutes, not months, for the meaner corners of the internet to reshape the story into something else. A story about humiliation, about entitlement, about celebrity meltdown, and viral shame. The cashier's voice was clipped between laughter and mockery. His fear became a punchline. His plea not to be filmed, "Don't film me, man," was looped into reaction gifs. On forums, the clip became evidence in cultural debates about the limits of fame and the obligations of fans. And yet, beneath the meme there were other voices. People uneasy with the joke. They asked if the laughter was masking something darker. Because if you knew the history, if you knew how 2 decades of recorded violence had taught people in hip-hop to distrust visibility, you wouldn't be asking whether Kodak was paranoid. You'd be asking whether the phone in that cashier's hand was, in fact, just a phone. Think back to September 12, 2022. A restaurant in South Los Angeles, Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles, has been pulled into history because the unthinkable happened there. An artist went in and didn't come out. A masked gunman shot him in a robbery that, in the space of minutes, turned a celebrity's life into a family's permanent absence. There are hard facts in that narrative. The date, the place, the trial that followed. But the scar that violence left is less measurable. It lodged in other artists like a warning. It taught them that the line between public exposure and personal vulnerability can be porous, if not lethal. When someone who has watched friends fall becomes a public figure, their instincts change. Fans mean well. They often mean affection. But there are other actors, people who watch for vulnerability, for a phone that reveals a schedule or a location or the direction of travel. The difference between a friendly clip and a breadcrumb for someone with bad intent can be tiny. So when a phone comes out near someone who's carried those losses, they don't see an innocuous tool. They see a risk. They see a vector. Is it paranoia to treat film detention as dangerous when the world has shown evidence people will kill for loot and status? Or is it prudence? Kodak's reaction within the Pizza Hut clip is the fulcrum of misunderstanding. He sees the phone. He hears the cashier's voice. He feels the pressure that decades in the public eye have layered onto him. But these instincts are not the absence of reason. If anything, they're sharpened by reason. He knows that a short clip posted online can become a map in minutes. It can reveal more than a smile. It can reveal where you park, who you were with, and the path you'll take next. It can create a virtual breadcrumb trail. What Kodak chose to do, pause, assess, sidestep potential escalation, and finally leave, wasn't the moment people remembered. They remembered the image that matched their narrative expectations. A celebrity looking stern while a worker panics. The version that adapted into the internet's lexicon was simplified, flattened, and recirculated until even the participants' intentions were misread. But here's the crucial piece the feeds didn't want you to keep. He did not escalate. He did not weaponize his fame. He did not become the violent figure the algorithm suggested he might be. He engaged, concluded the transaction, and left. Why didn't that make for the headlines? Because calm endings don't get ads. They don't get bites. They don't generate the dopamine spikes that platforms sell. Which brings us to the cashier, an often invisible figure in viral moments, the person who is at once participant and instrument of entertainment. His voice cracks in the clip. He's human, nervous, starstruck, overwhelmed. What the internet made him into was a caricature. But in the longer feeding chain, on the checkout counter during the morning rush, dealing with threats of being recorded without consent, with managerial pressure and low wages, his reaction is a symptom of a broader environment. One where workers in public-facing roles are expected to remain cheerful while everything around them is commodified. Ask, what would you do if your job required both service and immediate emotional labor while a camera appended itself to your identity? How durable is public compassion when the service worker is both subject and audience for a global feed? The legal headlines had their own rhythm. Miranda Johnson, her name attached to trashing a luxury vehicle, to arrests for battery, was part of the chapter people were eager to read. The argument that spilled in public was filled with performative outrage and real human failure. The accusations felt like evidence to some and gossip to others. But when the dust settled, the real settlement was quieter. A parenting plan that pushed both adults toward a difficult, unspectacular compromise. The work of being a parent isn't content. It's repetition, logistics, negotiated custody exchanges, school pickups, midweek meals. Those routines don't create viral moments, but they create children who may one day see the footage and need context. Who is owed that context? The kids. The staff at the Pizza Hut. The cashier, who will continue to clock in. The public, who will continue to swipe. What happens when you live in a visible life? You learn to privatize certain things because the public cannot be trusted to carry nuance. The choice to prioritize children over narrative is a moral decision that audiences rarely reward. Why would they? Narratives that fit existing frames are easier to share. And yet, that decision, to choose privacy, to agree to a parenting plan instead of tearing the other to pieces in front of cameras, was one of the most meaningful acts in the story. It's the adult move people rarely notice because it's not dramatic. Is maturity visible? Or do we only recognize it when it's gone? There are many small scenes that the clip ignores. The Pizza Hut's fluorescent light, the grease smell and the hum of refrigerated units in the back. The cashier wiping his hands on his apron stained with marinara. The woman on the phone in the corner who thinks nothing of the celebrity in line because her child needs a pizza for practice. The manager glancing at the scene and weighing whether to intervene. Those details matter because they anchor the moment in a human geography that isn't designed for attention. Public spaces, especially low-wage workspaces, become arenas where the instantaneous eye of the internet can create pressure with no regard for the consequences. The cashier is not merely a clip. He is an employee with a story. Maybe he's a father. Maybe he's saving for school. Maybe his boss is on his back about theft and punctuality. That whole gravity well of pressure is compressed into the second his voice cracks. We laugh at that second because the platforms teach us to extract humor from human fragility. But what are we doing to the people who are most exposed? One of the understated tragedies of viral culture is this. It finds the easiest human to lampoon and makes that person the lesson for everyone. We patrol the boundaries of acceptable behavior using other people's nervous breakdowns as study material. And then we act surprised when discomfort becomes trauma. Have we considered what happens to someone's life after a clip becomes a meme? The anatomy of virality is a lesson in attention economics. Clips are designed to be consumed quickly. Social networks reward content that triggers emotive reactions. The angrier, funnier, or more shocking the better. That's why the calm resolution between Kodak and the Pizza Hut staff was invisible. It lacks the elemental sparks that the algorithms amplify. What remained visible, and worthy of repetition, was the short, emotionally raw moment that fit into the cultural scripts people were already primed to believe. The reposts framed the clip as evidence of two competing stories. The entitled star and the nervous worker, or, alternatively, a righteous star reminding people of boundaries. Both narratives oversimplify. But simplification is the language of virality. It's a currency. Which leads to the harder question. Whose wallet is being lightened by our attention? Who profits from stripping the context out of human moments and packaging them into short-form entertainment? Platforms, advertisers, influencer accounts. The same entities that sell clicks and accept little responsibility for what those clicks cost in real people's lives. Is the economy of attention morally accountable? Or does responsibility dissolve as the view count climbs? The clip spread was not the end. Public reaction extended beyond laughing comments. There were think pieces, hot take threads, and a small but persistent chorus questioning whether habitual filming of celebrities in public should be considered a form of aggression. Columns asked whether fans' sense of entitlement had ossified into a cultural default. When you are visible, people believe they have access to you. Social psychologists debated parasocial relationships. The illusion of intimacy that makes strangers feel like friends and taste permission to capture, post, and monetize. The conversation ballooned into larger cultural territory. Did hypervisibility, coupled with the collapse of boundaries between private and public life, produce a new kind of risk? How should society regulate the act of capturing content in spaces where people do not have the ability to consent? Museums have rules. Private events have security. Why did the public commons become a no-man's land where anyone could be filmed and judged without context? For many, the answer was simple. You should be nicer. But niceness is not an enforceable policy. Legislation moves slowly. Social norms move at the speed of culture war. So the quick remedy most people offered was to urge citizens to be better, more considerate, more empathetic. But empathy is not scalable if you don't provide alternatives. There are structural reasons people record. To capture a moment they deem rare, to gain followers, to stake a claim in the social media economy. If the incentive structure favors viral capture, holding individuals morally culpable becomes an inadequate fix. What would a different incentive structure look like? Should platforms deprioritize content captured in public without consent? Should there be a technology that blurs faces when a subject indicates they don't want to be filmed? There are solutions, but they require trade-offs. And trade-offs require leadership. Who should lead? After the clip, Kodak spoke directly to the camera in a way that surprised many. He could have hired a PR firm to sculpt a sanitized statement. He didn't. Instead, he talked about stakes that hit closer to home. Being a father, wanting family stability, not living for the approval of strangers. He called himself the zookeeper, an unflattering metaphor he used in jest to push back against caricatures. There was realness in his tone, an exhaustion that comes from living under constant surveillance. What was notable about his address wasn't the content. It was the candor. He refused the posture that many public figures adopt. Careful, sanitized, litigation-conscious. He spoke in a way that suggested he was speaking for a broader community. Artists who worry about being turned into targets by the ease of location sharing, artists who have lost friends and want to keep their lives and families intact. That speech didn't change the internet's incentive structure. But it changed a few people's minds. It made some listeners consider the deeper stakes beyond entertainment. What it costs to be visible. How often do public figures get to control the story? Rarely. But when they do, what they choose to prioritize reveals a lot. He prioritized children over clicks. That's a choice worth noticing. This is the point where the story stops being about celebrities and starts being about us. It asks a question that is simple and brutal. When you reach for your phone the next time you see someone famous, what do you owe them? It's not a question about legality. It's a question about ethics. A photo in itself is not violence. But an image is not neutral when it becomes a piece of a larger chain that can expose, endanger, or erase someone's privacy. The act of filming is an action that carries weight. It is not merely passive documentation. And yet, cultural scripts teach us to treat it as harmless. The public's moral imagination is still catching up with the tools we built. We made cameras ubiquitous before we decided how to behave with them. Do we owe people a courtesy, a conversation, a refusal to post? Or do we reserve judgment about public behavior for the platforms that monetize crueler, quicker responses? There are other quieter parts of the story. Moments that don't trend but that might change a life more than 1 million reposts. The manager who later spoke to the cashier, offering him a short paid day off because the young worker had been shaken. A mother who saw the clip and wrote in to the local paper, explaining how she was relieved the two parents had chosen their children over public spectacle. A neighbor at school who helped with pickups when tensions were highest. These acts of small mercy are the scaffolding of recovery. They are repair in material forms. Time, money, labor. What does repair look like in an era of instant amplification? It looks like human beings committing to each other outside the loop of metrics. It looks like communities that hold each other accountable with care rather than spectacle. It looks like policies at companies that discourage clipping and posting of private moments as entertainment. It looks like legal frameworks that better protect people from predatory filming practices without policing everyday citizen behavior. But most of all, it looks like an internal recalibration, asking whether the moment you're about to take is worth what it could cost someone else. Would you take a picture if you knew it could place someone in danger? When you read a viral caption, remember this. The writer of that caption chose a frame to make a point. The video may be only a second long, but it's surrounded by longer stories, histories, and consequences. If you care about human flourishing, it's worth asking whose stories are being amplified and whose are being flattened. The artists who have survived violence carry lessons we ignore at our own peril. They see the world with a wariness others may find excessive because they have learned by loss. Their caution is not just for themselves. It's a lesson about a public that has to learn restraint before it learns compassion. The Pizza Hut clip ends, in the footage, with neatly packaged moments. An order placed, hands exchanged, and two people walking away. But the unwritten pages that follow, parenting plans, quiet apologies, the names of children, those are where meaning lives. Those things don't get hashtags. They get days, bills, and midnight conversations. If we are going to live inside a culture transformed by ubiquitous capture, perhaps the least we could do is enact a habit of asking, before I film, what might this cost someone else? Before I post, what story am I choosing to tell? Before I laugh, who am I judging? The answers to those questions are simple and difficult at once. Simple because they ask for basic attention and human decency. Difficult because they require us to change patterns that reward fast, loud reactions. So here's another question to leave with. What kind of public do we want to be? One that celebrates growth and chooses privacy for fragile moments? Or one that profits, noisily and relentlessly, from other people's fractures? If you're honest with yourself, your choice is already being made every time you swipe and tap. Because sometimes the most revealing part of a viral moment isn't what happens on camera. It's what happened long before the recording began, and what happens long after the view counts stop climbing. And if you want to be part of a different future, start there. By choosing, in those small private decisions, not to make someone else's life the price of your entertainment. The day Montell learned that hiding from the truth cost more than exposure ever could began like many others. A small, ordinary morning that would bend and split the rest of his life into before and after. He sat at the edge of the bed, the light coming through the blinds in tight bars, the same light that had once made his skin glow on magazine covers and television stages. Now it only exposed the hollowed curve of his face, the tired lines that fame had once promised would never arrive. He remembered not the cameras or the flash at first, but the way Kristen's hands trembled when she slid a folded note across the kitchen table. How does one explain betrayal with a single piece of paper? How do you carry the knowledge that your world, the careful architecture you built, has cracks the size of canyons? What does a man do when the one person he promised never to hurt becomes the very one who holds the proof of his failures? Before the confession, there had been a life gilded with loud applause. The song that made him a household name became the soundtrack for bar nights, graduations, and for young men learning how to swagger. He knew every lyric. He had lived on that rhythm, the beat that opened doors and closed off realities. On the surface, everything looked intact. The truth, though, lived in margins, late-night calls, hidden hotel rooms, the kind of small compromises that slide in like rain until they become a flood. Montell chose to tell Kristen everything. Not the frills. Not the sugarcoating. Every affair, every deception, every excuse. He watched as the words carved into her face. The look that followed was not merely of someone betrayed. It was the look of someone who had discovered that the place she trusted most was gone. The house that sheltered their family was suddenly a stranger's house. Why confess? Why not let the rumor mill do the damage while he controlled the narrative? Those are questions people ask when they consider the cost of truth. He chose the other path because the weight inside him had become unbearable. He had reached a fork. Preserve the image or preserve the soul. He chose the latter. Kristen stayed. This is the part that people stumble over when they tell the story on panels and podcasts. They ask, why would someone stay with a person who had broken them so completely? But that question assumes easy answers. It assumes forgiveness is simple, an elevator up and out of pain. It is not. Forgiveness is a battlefield, not a surrender. Kristen's decision to stay was not acceptance. It was an act of war. For their marriage, for their family, for whatever part of their bond still pulsed under the ash. For Montell, forgiveness became a mirror he could not stop looking into. He kept asking, how could she forgive me? The question turned into prayer, into therapy, into midnight whispers against the ceiling when the house was asleep. He tried to earn it in every practical way, through open calendars, full disclosure, classes, counseling. He wanted to prove he was repentant, but some things money and confession cannot buy back. Trust, once shattered, bears the scars of a slow and fragile repair. They rebuilt. Not perfectly, no human home can claim such magic, but with a stubbornness that felt like faith. Then the world tilted again. Kristen strayed. Ask yourself, when someone has already forgiven, does that exhaustion make them equal to a fracture later on? Or does the first forgiver hold a moral shield? The reality is complicated. Her infidelity did not arrive as a grand, cinematic betrayal. It came in a season when the marriage was frayed, when Montell's career decisions pulled him away emotionally, when grief and the pressure to perform quietly wore down both of them. It began in a workplace that offered the attention she had missed, the late-night conversations that met a need she couldn't find at home. When Montell discovered the affair, the world he had been quietly rebuilding shattered again. This time there were no speeches, no negotiating. The sting was immediate. The old questions reversed direction. How could she? How could he survive another loss after being forgiven? Who deserved grace, and how much? He forgave her. It was not resignation. It was a radical practice. He stood where she had stood, carried the same decision, felt the same weight. And something shifted in him in that moment. Forgiveness moved from a concept to an embodied reality, an action that required him to put down his weapons and carry a tenderness that could have easily failed. But forgiveness didn't fix anything instantly. It stitched. The work that followed was stubborn and often small. Being present when words felt impossible, answering questions without defensiveness, the daily, tedious labor of being honest about desire, fear, and disappointment. It was therapy appointments that felt like dental procedures, cleaning away infection, making the mouth ache before it could function again. And life was relentless. The music business is a machine that does not sleep. It tires you, burns you, and then either moves on to the next star or asks you to be something you are not. By 2003, he walked away from mainstream music. He signed to a label for the sake of artistic integrity, but the market had moved. The hits stopped. The touring slowed. The bank accounts dwindled. In less than a decade, success evaporated into a string of small gigs, and then into the silence of canceled calls. Then came a loss so deep it reshaped everything. A child gone, a grief that enters the body and changes its geometry. It is the kind of pain that returns truth to its rightful place and strips away pretense. They fell into bankruptcy, the public humiliation of numbers that don't add up, the private collapse of plans you can no longer afford. He later called that season the 7 years of darkness. But inside darkness, the human heart can become a quarry for discovery. He stopped performing in large arenas. He stopped seeking applause. He retreated to the essentials: family, piano, God. He stopped believing the world would save him. He began to believe people could. Norcross, Georgia became a geography of refuge and humbling. In that town, in a small church that smelled faintly of coffee and wood polish, he found an altar that required no costume. He wasn't searching for a new career when he walked into the sanctuary. He was searching for relief. The congregation wasn't made of industry insiders. It was made of people who knew about mortgages, sick kids, and the hard math of life. People who had not been invited into his earlier orbit. The moment that shifted, everything came in a plain conversation. "You told me not to sing anymore," he said to a voice that had been steady through the years. "No," the voice answered, not with judgment but with a clarity that felt like a wind off the sea. "You told yourself that. I never said that." On November 5, 2024, he underwent a radical prostatectomy. The surgeons removed the prostate. The initial reports were optimistic. No signs of disease. Relief arrived like a cautious friend. Then, in September 2025, scans revealed the cancer had returned, this time more aggressive, in the lymph nodes and prostate bed. 5 days before a national television appearance that would cover his survival story, he learned the fight had resumed. And the generosity they practiced earlier, the radical decision to give everything, returned as a theme in their ministry. In 2022, after immersing themselves in principles of generosity, they gave away their savings, trusting in faith rather than finances. 2 months later, a property appeared, 13,000 square feet on 6 acres in Atlanta. Unlikely, beyond their budget, and yet suddenly present. They named it the Jordan River. When someone asks, what happens when success demands a version of you that your real life cannot survive? The answer seems to be that you are forced to decide what matters. How many people lose themselves not because they failed but because they succeeded too fast, too loudly, and without protection? How many of us are tempted to trade the messy, costly work of integrity for the glitter of applause? And when forgiveness once saved you, what happens when you're the one who needs it most? The story shows that forgiveness does not erase consequences. It opens a door to healing, but the path through is paved with difficulty and sustained attention. If compassion is a muscle, then sustained mercy is its training regimen. What would you do if telling the truth could cost you everything, but staying silent might cost someone their life? Which kind of preservation matters more? Your image or a life saved by honesty? Montell's life became an argument for choosing the harder route. The route that often leaves you exposed, but also leaves you whole. There are no tidy endings here. The documentary may capture the arc of illness and recovery, but the real work is ongoing. The Jordan River, both a place and a metaphor, offers a setting where people can practice unglamorous repair. The church streaming from a living room shows that ministry does not need pageantry to be effective. The work of reconciliation remains inconsistent, sometimes graceful, sometimes clumsy, but always real. In the end, his legacy is not a number of records sold, nor is it the headlines that once screamed triumph. It is a series of smaller, harder victories, a marriage that survived betrayal twice, a man who left fame to find his faith, a pastor who learns to lead by showing how to get up when you fall, a public figure who decided to become a roadmap rather than a monument. And so the final question remains for the reader and listener. What does forgiveness really demand once the damage is already done? Is it merely absolution, or is it a daily, unglamorous commitment to show up and do the work? When the cameras are off, what do you do with the truth you have kept? Is restoration something you wait for, or something you labor for? Montell's answer, imperfect and evolving, was to choose survival of the soul over survival of the image. He chose to confess, to make amends, to lead, to fight disease out in the open, to transform his celebrity into service. He kept asking the hard questions publicly so others would not have to learn the lessons in private. And in doing so, he made his life a living sermon about the cost and the power of truth. If you sit with his story, if you let it sit in you, it confronts you with a personal inventory. What would you do if the truth threatened to destroy your world? Who in your life deserves the brutal economy of honesty? And if you were offered forgiveness, all things considered, would you carry it like a shield or a charge? Montell's life did not come with a tidy moral. It came with a commitment to the long, messy work of being human. Standing where he stands today, after the admissions, the affairs, the losses, the bankruptcy, the diagnoses, and the treatments, he is neither a saint nor a cautionary tale. He is a man who kept showing up. That, ultimately, is the question we all face. Will we choose the version of life that hides truths and protects images, or will we choose the harder path? The path that exposes us, humbles us, and sometimes saves others as a result.